In today's episode, sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. A driver hits my truck, refused to get insurance involved, wasting my time, and being difficult. Enjoy the butthole tax. Escalate, rinse, repeat. So let's get started. Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. Back when I was a much younger man, I worked as a project manager for a small company. The owner's name was Vince. Now Vince wasn't a truly horrible man, but he was exceptionally hypocritical. He'd tout the virtues of charity but was cheap. He'd readily give the impression that he was morally superior, because he was a true believer, but then he was the ones who was charging the adult movies to his room on road trips. You get the type. He wasn't truly horrible, but he was more than a bit of an ass. Our story starts off with a couple of missed appointments by Tom, our salesperson, and Vince's friend. While everyone else was held to Vince's, supposedly, moral standards, Tom could get away with anything and Vince wouldn't do anything about it. How he conned Vince into giving him a job remains a mystery to this day, but Tom would show up to the office inebriated if he showed up at all. Tom's drinking got worse, and he stood up our biggest client, my client, as I was the PM on more than half of their jobs twice in a row, and the client was furious. So Vince put out a memo that no one could miss a meeting with this client with no exceptions. One day I'm under the weather more than just a bit. I call in on leave and ask Vince to call the client to reschedule. He starts yelling on the phone that I have to make the appointment because there are no exceptions, going so far as to tell me that if I don't make the appointment then perhaps I wouldn't have a job when I return to the office. Yeah, those morals are pretty flexible, Vince? So I drag my *S to the meeting, but I'm pretty furious at this already. A couple of weeks later it's Christmas time. We all look forward to it because our meager and under-market salaries are bumped with our annual profit-sharing bonus. So Vince gets up to give his speech, which we don't care about, and then we should get our checks. Except he starts saying that he's using some of the profit-sharing for employee initiatives to make our lives better in the office. For example, he's buying company cars so we don't have to take our vehicles to client locations. There goes our mileage reimbursement, including one for himself. Of course his was a Mercedes and the rest were Ford Taurus cheap models. And he announces that he's hired a plant service to green up our office to improve our working conditions. Because of these employee benefits, our profit-sharing bonus was about half what we should have received. You have got to be kidding me. The cars were bad enough, but the plants really became the object of our resentment. Now normally when you green up an office you ask them to bring in a few plants. But no, because this was essentially on our dime, Vince didn't care what it cost. So they brought in more office greenery than I've ever seen before or since. Every office had some sort of indoor tree or potted plant. You couldn't hardly get to the office copier, as it was flanked by 2 trees. 1/3 of the break room was covered in foliage. Now people really started to grumble, and Vince heard those grumblings. He took it personally that his generosity was being questioned. So he sent out a memo to everyone that anyone who was unhappy with this could bring their office plant to his office, and they would have a discussion about it. The inference was clear: complain and you might lose your job, because he spent your money on something he wanted. I'd had enough and frankly I didn't care anymore. So I showed up very early the next morning, and spent over an hour carrying every office ficus and fern into Vince's corner office. I put the plants on his shelves, desk, chair and bookcase. I covered every square inch of the floor with potted trees. I even hung a couple from the drop ceiling. When I say the office was packed, believe me. It was all I could do to get the door closed. But before I closed the door I left a 1-sentence memo on Vince's desk. Getting out of the room was really quite difficult. Covered in sweat and just a bit of potting soil, I sat down at my desk and waited. Vince showed up a half hour later, and I heard a yell. Vince started yelling so much the fat little weeble was shaking all over. He stormed into my office and angrily asked me if I did it. I told him that I had, and that I was complying with his memo. I wasn't happy with the plants that MY Profit Sharing had purchased and brought them to his office as directed. He turned redder and redder as he huffed and sputtered. Finally, he ordered me to remove the plants from his office. "Sorry, Vince, I can't do that," I replied. "I had to go attend a meeting with the big client, and there are no exceptions to missing it." And then I left. Since everyone else had scattered when they saw what was happening, Vince had to remove the plants from his office by himself. It must have about killed him. When he finally got to his desk, the memo was the only paper on it. On it there was only one line. "Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. Malicious compliance x2 once for the plants and the other for the meeting. Win/win, baby." Epilogue, Part 1. When I returned to the office, of course Vince was waiting for me. He called me into his now cleared office demanding an explanation. I sat down and told him my perspective about how he took money from my pocket to benefit himself. I told him his actions were unchristian, just to hammer it home, and he damaged his relationship with every employee at the company. I told him the memo explained all of that. He was so caught up with his way or the highway that he had utterly failed in his obligations to his employees. He didn't like that much. He threatened to fire me, so I calmly mentioned that if he fired me for complying with his memos, I would be eligible for unemployment and perhaps even legal recourse. Finally, I mentioned that I also happened to be the main contact for his largest client, and they wouldn't be too happy with removing me from their projects. He was stuck with me and he knew it. Then I got up and walked out of his office while Vince's mouth stood agape. Epilogue, Part 2. Oh yeah, about that meeting with the large client? That meeting was a job interview. I knew it went well, and I received the formal offer a couple of days later. I was now the lead of the project that I was working on. So I turned in my 2 weeks' notice, went to work for my client, and one of my first actions was to let Vince know that he was now working for me. Oh, the irony. Epilogue, Part 3. I wish I could say this all had a happier ending, but ultimately it didn't. The large client I went to work for sold out a couple of years later, and I was caught in a round of layoffs and consolidations. That was the beginning of a bad time in that industry, and I got laid off a couple more times in the next 3 years before finally switching careers altogether to what I do now, which makes me a comfortable living. Vince's business was damaged, but not destroyed, and he survived for another decade and a half before selling it off, but he made out alright in the end. I didn't fire his firm, I really needed those services, but I was probably a bit more of in a hole than I needed to be. Vince did get the message, giving his employees a mid-year bonus that essentially restored their profit-sharing percentage. And we did patch up our relationship a couple of years later at an industry conference, to the point we joked about it a bit. Or at least he pretended to, since I was now part of his largest client. A driver hits my truck, refused to get insurance involved, wasting my time, and being difficult. Enjoy the butthole tax. Hello readers. I am posting this here because for the time being, I believe that this is the correct thread. But if anyone thinks it belongs to other threads, please let me know. Thank you. This happened just a week ago. I am an over-the-road truck driver, and I was on off-duty mode since the day before, so I was stationary the whole time. While I was in my bed trying to sleep, I suddenly heard a loud crunch, following by a pretty rough rocking of my truck. When I got out and checked, I saw a truck trying to park on the left spot, and struck me on his blind spot, right side of his trailer. The damage was, my driver's side mirror was folded and there are cracks on my left quarter fender. The driver got out, checked the damage for both my truck and his trailer. I told him that I will need his registration, DL, and insurance, the whole 9 yards. At first, he was a little hesitant to give the information, but ended up following the rules. I did the same for him. Then, he proceeded to tell me that he would prefer to pay the damage in cash or check. The reason was, if insurance was involved, his company would charge him $2,500 automatically, so it's a huge loss for him. Even though I don't agree with that and still thinks insurance is better, I comply, and talk to my manager about the whole situation. At first, he wanted to claim through insurance too, but after seeing the damage, it was very minor. He settled and told me to charge the driver $1,200 if he wants to pay cash or check. I told the driver what my manager thinks the cost of the repair is. He was more hesitant than when I asked for his information, so I told him, it's either $1,200 or insurance. Then he got this bright idea to try to get evaluations from the professional in the nearby shop, for the cost of parts and labor. He even tried to fix my side mirror, which to my surprise, was fixed. Okay, so no need to replace the side mirror, but the fender is still cracked, so that needed to be fixed. His reason to get professional evaluation is so he can get a receipt for tax purposes, so it's understandable. I told him that I will need to leave in 4 hours, which is true. So I won't have all day to sit around in the mechanic shop, not to mention I didn't get much sleep since I need to take care of the damage. He was very assuring that it will be very quick. It won't. Shortest time I've ever been in a shop is 8 hours. So I comply. We drove to the nearest shop, which is 30 minutes away. Inside the truck, he kept saying that $1,200 is too much to fix a fender. I didn't say anything in retaliation because I actually do not know how much it costs to fix a fender. I just trusted my manager. When we arrived, the tech said that he can't fix the truck within 3 hours. It was fairly busy. So we asked if we can just get an evaluation for the cost of parts and labor, which the tech said that he can do. After 1 hour, the tech came out and gave us a piece of paper for the evaluation. The total came out to be $1,440 for parts and labor, not including paint job, which is around $400. He was shocked, thinking that he got ripped off by the evaluation. He complained a whole bunch to the tech, but there's nothing the tech can do about it. He asked for their evaluation, he got evaluation. Then, he went back to me and asked if he can still go back to the $1,200 cost. I told him. But I thought you wanted to get a receipt for evaluation done by a professional. To say he was stunned was an understatement. He kept making up excuses about the cost, but again, I repeated, either this or insurance. He finally complied and wrote me a check for $1,440. After we parted ways, I mentioned to him, remember to keep your words for the paint job. If not, my manager will claim the damage as hit and run. He looked at me with the dirtiest look he could muster, but he couldn't do anything about it. Oh well, at least he got his receipt. Escalate, rinse, repeat. Part of my job involves processing repair/service orders for the medical devices we make. I enter them in the computer and send them to the service department for maintenance or repair. Sometimes customers will request that particular orders be escalated to the quality assurance team for problems that are long-running, recurring, or potentially dangerous. Either they'll call in the problem and a note will be put on the account to escalate, or they'll write an escalation request on the paperwork they send us. I was told to keep an eye out for orders that have the same kinds of red flags that escalation orders typically have, and using my own best judgment send them to the quality assurance team even if the customer has not explicitly asked to escalate the order. When I was first hired, I didn't have the experience necessary to make those determinations on my own, so I didn't escalate any extra orders. Eventually I was comfortable enough to make those judgment calls, so I started being more proactive about escalating orders. Within a few weeks, my manager pulled me aside to tell me that the QA team was complaining that I was escalating too many orders to them. I was surprised, but promised to do better. I investigated and found that the unofficial understanding was that as long as the customer wasn't complaining, we weren't supposed to invent more work for the QA team. That meant less work for me too, so I was fine with it and stopped proactively escalating. The malicious compliance. Like it or not, the requirement to proactively escalate orders to the QA team remained part of the official process. As near as I can tell, it was put in solely so management could point to it and say, see? We encourage our employees to go above and beyond. The practical consequences would go as follows. Every year or two, a manager would notice that requirement and remind our group to follow it. Our protests would be ignored. We would comply and start proactively escalating orders. The quality assurance team would complain to our bosses that we were escalating too many. Our managers would warn us to back off. We would entirely stop with the proactive escalating. The QA team would thank our management and our management would tell us how happy they were with our progress. This has happened 3 or 4 times since I was hired. We've started betting on how long until the next time it happens, and how long until the QA team complains when we do start this foolishness again. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.